the Young Dudes. Sirius's Perspective by Rollercosterwords. Chapter 77. 5th Year. Gentlemen. By the time they'd managed to sneak successfully back into their dorm, all of Sirius's excited energy had drained away. With the adrenaline all used up, there was no shield against the weight of exhaustion. His body seemed to realise, suddenly, and with quite a bit of resentment, that he had kept it up all night, and began immediately to demand that he do something to rectify this situation. Sirius couldn't stop yawning as they walked up the stairs. "Don't you want to change?" James asked as he collapsed onto his bed, still fully dressed. Those clothes are going to stink when you wake up." James tutted disapprovingly, but pressed no further. Sirius buried his head into his pillow, nestling into the blankets. They were warm and soft and heavy, and in no time at all, he was asleep. In his dream, he was running. The woods fizzed and blurred around him. It was summer, it was winter, it was spring. He was chasing something intoxicating. Clove and parchment and burnt sugar. He was the dog, and then he wasn't, and then he was again. The moon was swollen in the sky, bloated, and when he howled it cracked open like an eggshell, bursting. Snowflakes kissed his eyelashes, melting into his skin. He woke up. Sirius was in his bedroom, back in Grimmauld Place. He blinked, disorientated. How had he gotten here? He could have sworn he'd gone to bed in Gryffindor Tower. What month was it? On his walls, the Muggle girls stared at him, puckering their lips and posing. The moonlight cast shadows, turning their coy smiles into something more sinister, something more derisive, as if they were saying, "We know something you don't." Sirius shivered, and he realised he wasn't alone. The body next to him groaned, shifting, long arms tugging him back into the blankets, skin fever-hot, clove and parchment and burnt sugar. Sirius inhaled deeply, and the body began to move in a way that sent heat crackling up and down his spine. On the walls, the girls continued smiling. "Wait." Sirius tried to pull back, but he felt hazy, languid and slow. He didn't want to stop. On the posters, the girls began to move. "Wait, hang on," he tried again, fumbling for words. They're watching." The body beside him laughed. "Nobody's watching," the familiar voice murmured. "Come back." Sirius came awake, gasping, sweating, heat still coiled in his abdomen. He shoved the blankets off, then yanked them back on as soon as he noticed the evidence of his dream, extremely grateful to his past self for having the energy to draw the curtains around his bed before passing out. "Sirius?" James's voice came from outside his bed. "You awake?" Sirius groaned, heart still pounding as he flopped back down onto his pillows. James laughed. "Come on, Sleeping Beauty, you're going to miss lunch." "Just go without me," Sirius called back. "I'll raid the kitchens later." Without warning, James poked his head behind the curtains. Sirius sat up quickly, scrambling to readjust the blankets. "You sure?" he asked, eyes blinking owlishly behind his spectacles. "Yeah," Sirius croaked, voice breaking a bit. "I need a shower. You were right, these clothes stink." James grinned. "Told you so." He withdrew, voice growing fainter as he walked towards the door. "I'll see if I can smuggle something up for you." Sirius sighed, listening to the door shut as James left. Once he was certain that he was alone, he crawled out of bed, rummaging around for clean clothes before heading into the bathroom. Normally, Sirius forgot his dreams. Sometimes he'd wake up with a lingering impression, a flash of a memory, an image, a feeling, a taste. But it always faded quickly, and he usually never thought twice about whatever his mind got up to while he was asleep. But for some reason, this dream stuck. Sirius stood under the steaming water, trying to shake it off, but the more he tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to sink in, until all he had to do was close his eyes to recall the exact sensations he'd felt. He flushed with shame, frustrated by his lack of control that he had over his own mind. "Stop it," Sirius thought to himself firmly. "It's just a stupid dream." It wasn't as if he hadn't had that sort of dream before. He was a teenage boy, after all. He'd always figured that it just sort of came with the territory. It was just that he usually didn't remember them so clearly. Sirius scrubbed his hair vigorously, tugging his fingers through the tangled strands. He felt skittish and angry and frustrated. It wasn't as if he could control his dreams. It wasn't as if his dreams meant anything. They were just random, an amalgamation of whatever detritus happened to be floating through your subconscious. Probably, all it meant was that he needed to go out and snog someone. Some girl. Everyone talked about it like it was the be-all and end-all, and here he was, nearly 16 years old, with the only experience being a sloppy kiss in the back of a Muggle cinema. If anything, all the dream had meant was that he was pent up. He just needed to get it out of his system, that was all. Sirius stepped out of the shower, feeling marginally better, having reassured himself that such confusing dreams were a completely normal part of being a teenager. And it wasn't as if he was the only one. His friends were all dealing with the same bewildering experience of learning how to navigate a body that insisted on spiralling out of control all too often. Not that they ever discussed it, beyond a few crude jokes, but when you shared a room with 3 other boys, you were bound to overhear some things. Besides, Sirius thought as he pulled on his trousers, if all went according to plan, then soon he wouldn't even have to worry about all that anymore. He'd already asked Mary to go with him to the next Hogsmeade weekend, on a date. He wasn't entirely sure what had inspired him to do it. They'd just been chatting about their essay that McGonagall had assigned, and he'd offered to help her, and she'd said thank you, and squeezed his arm that way that he remembered from 3rd year, and, well, wasn't about time he got a girlfriend. Plenty of students in their year were pairing up, and Peter already had Desdemona. James didn't count because he was smitten with Lily, and Remus didn't count because he was Remus, and he was somehow the only person in their year who seemed completely unruffled by the hormones that had everyone else losing their minds. But Sirius had a reputation as a class heartthrob to maintain, and his dashing good looks could only go so far. Eventually he'd have to put his money where his mouth was. And he liked Mary, or at least he was pretty sure he did. She was funny and cheerful and a little bit rude. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and she didn't fawn over him the way that so many of his other admirers did. Plus, she'd already had a boyfriend, which meant she ought to know what she was doing, or at least Sirius hoped she did, because he certainly had no idea. So he'd asked her to go to Hogsmeade. Why not? And she'd smirked up at him, hand still on his arm, and said, "Sirius Black, are you asking me on a date?" And he'd shrugged and tossed his hair and said, "If you want to call it that." Mary had smacked his arm playfully, chiding, "If you want me to go out with you, you'll have to ask properly, Mr. High and Mighty. I'm not going to fall over you just because you flash me a smile. You can go to Effie Scunthorpe if you want that." Sirius had laughed and grinned and said, "Fine. Mary MacDonald, will you do me the honour of going on a date with me?" And she'd said yes. Saturday the 4th of October, 1975. The problem with taking a girl on a date, Sirius thought as he watched Mary decide between 2 quills at Scrivenshafts, was that no one explained to you how, exactly, dates were meant to be different from, any other Hogsmeade visit. So far, all they'd done was exactly what Sirius would normally do. A Honeyduke's run to stock up on sweets, a Scrivenshaft stop for new stationery. The biggest difference was that instead of his usual pursuit of the Zonko's wares with James, Mary had dragged him to Glad Rag's wizard wear and interrogated him about whether he thought the green or purple knee socks suited her better. Purple, obviously, but that was beside the point. It was all good fun, of course. Mary was easy to hang out with. She was easy to talk to, easy to laugh with. They gossiped about their professors, complained about their homework, and joked about the latest drama at Hogwarts. Professor Slughorn's new toupee. But, it didn't really feel that different from lounging around the common room, or sitting together at lunch. Which would have been fine, except that Sirius was pretty sure that a date was supposed to feel different, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing something wrong. Snogging. There was supposed to be snogging, wasn't there? When did that part happen? Who was supposed to start it? Was Mary waiting for him to make the move? "The 3 broomsticks?" she asked, playing with her quill. Yeah, sounds good," Sirius agreed, privately relieved that she didn't want to go to Madame Pavbut's instead. He'd seen Desdemona dragging Peter there earlier, and he'd thought that he might die of embarrassment if he ever had to set foot inside that frilly establishment. The 3 broomsticks was packed, as it usually was on Hogsmeade weekends, with students, but they still managed to find a table tucked into a back corner. They passed both James and Marlene on the way, sitting with a few other members of their Quidditch team. James wolf-whistled as they walked by, and Sirius smirked, throwing an arm around Mary's shoulders. She tutted and rolled her eyes, but she didn't shrug him off. "Wonder where Remus is," he said as they sat, craning his neck to look back at James's table. It was full of Quidditch players, but no Moony. Strange. Mary glanced over, shrugging. "Who knows?" she said. "I'm just glad Miles found someone to hang out with. I felt a bit guilty leaving her to fend for herself." "What about Lily?" A sour look came over Mary's face. "Oh, she promised Severus that she'd spend the day with him." Sirius choked on his butterbeer. "Evans is on a date with Snape." "No," Mary said quickly. "Well, she doesn't think it's a date, at least. Insists they're just friends. I told her it's not us she needs to convince. Proper creepy, the way he pines over her, and she just refuses to see it." "Yeah, Snape's a right git," Sirius agreed, frowning. "I know, and he gets worse every year, but she still has this ridiculous idea that she can fix him or something, just because they were friends when they were kids. She always blames his family, says he's just having a rough time at home right now. And I'm sorry, but that's bollocks. Lots of people have shitty families, and they don't go around calling their classmates nasty things just to make themselves feel better." Sirius nodded, sipping his drink. He found that once Mary got going, it was better just to sit back and listen, rather than attempting to interrupt. "I keep trying to tell her we're not little kids anymore. At this point, he's making his own choices. I mean, look at you," she continued, gesturing with her mug of butterbeer. "You and Regulus have both got the same family, but you aren't spouting all the same pure-blood crap that the Slytherins are on about." Sirius felt an uncomfortable twist in his gut at the mention of his family. He bristled, snapping defensively. "Reg is not like Snape." Mary paused, raising an eyebrow. "Really?" she asked, guarding him. "Because they both call me the same things." Sirius flushed, looking down at his hands. He felt angry and ashamed, thinking of his little brother spitting hateful slurs in the hallway. It didn't sit right with him. "Sorry," he mumbled, fidgeting with his mug. Mary sighed. "Well, it's not you that needs to apologise," she said, sounding a bit exasperated. It's the same thing I keep trying to tell Lily, I suppose. Just because you knew someone growing up doesn't mean they aren't going to change. And just because you know someone's having a hard time doesn't mean you should ignore the fact they're acting like a dickhead. Everyone has shit to deal with, but it's not like everyone chooses to be cruel because of it." A part of Sirius wanted to argue with this, wanted to defend his brother, to say that Mary just didn't understand what Reggie was going through. Except he knew that that was exactly the point that she was making. Still, it made him uncomfortable to hear his brother compared to Severus. They weren't the same. They just weren't. "Anyway," Mary said, nudging his shin with her foot under the table. "I didn't mean to bring up your family. Sorry. I know you're sensitive about it." "I'm not sensitive," Sirius huffed indignantly. She laughed. "Oh, cheer up. Come on. How about we go to Zonko's after this? You can explain how those exploding trick ones work, and I'll pretend to be interested and act like you're devastatingly clever." At this, a grudging laugh escaped Sirius's lips. "Blimey, MacDonald," he shook his head. "You really know how to stroke a man's ego." She tipped her drink, wiggling her eyebrows. "Among other things." Sirius choked, for the second time on his butterbeer. Aside from this single suggestive comment, however, there was nothing further to differentiate the date from any other Hogsmeade weekend. They finished their butterbeers and went to Zonko's, and Mary acted absolutely enthralled by everything Sirius said, as promised. They continued talking as they made their way back up to the castle, and Sirius felt entirely at ease, until they drew close to the Hogwarts entryway, at which point he realised that he was rapidly running out of time to do whatever he was supposed to do on a date. They paused outside the castle. Sirius wasn't sure where he was supposed to look. "I had a fun time," Mary said, smiling up at him. "Yeah, so did I." Can I ask you something? Oh, Merlin. Mm-hmm. Why did you ask me to come to Hogsmeade with you? Fuck. Merlin's bloody bollocks. For a date? Mary giggled. Well, I know that. She continued to stare at him, expectantly. I don't think I'm entirely sure what you're asking, MacDonald. He scratched his head, trailing off. Mary sighed. Look, Sirius, she said, patting his arm. I really did have a good time, and of course I'm interested. But I just feel like I should tell you that after everything I went through with Darren last summer, I'm not ready to rush into anything. Sirius blinked, trying to figure out what any of that had to do with him. Mary continued speaking. You're so lovely, obviously, but you can be a bit immature, and if I'm going to have a boyfriend, I'm going to need to make sure he's someone who can treat me right. Boyfriend. She said boyfriend. Does that mean she wanted to be his girlfriend? No, she was still talking. We haven't spent all that much time together, really, not without our other friends, so I think it would be best if we got to know each other a bit better first. And if you actually act like a gentleman, well, then, she smirked, I suppose we can have another chat. All right? Oh, wait. Hang on a second. What do you mean? Act like a gentleman? Mary laughed, squeezing his arm before letting go. Well, for a start, she grinned, you could offer to carry my bags for me.